Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for coming. My name is Nicole Siggins. I'm on the governance team at MapSwipe. I reside in Hamburg, Germany, and I'm very excited to be here today to tell you a little bit about MapSwipe and what its future is in OpenStreetMap. So before we begin, who here has heard of MapSwipe but never actually used it? A couple folks there in the back? OK. And then who here has actually used MapSwipe to map? OK, a few folks over there. Has anyone here actually created a mapping project on MapSwipe? OK, we got one here in the front. Amazing. And then who here has actually never heard of MapSwipe? All right, quite a few of you. Excellent. That is a good place to start. So let's start with what actually is MapSwipe. So MapSwipe is a humanitarian application that was launched in 2016 with funding from MSF, and it was launched under the greater Missing Maps umbrella. So Missing Maps is a project that was started in 2014 from several different humanitarian NGOs that were hoping to get areas of the world that were not currently represented on any map into OpenStreetMap. And the initial goal for a MapSwipe project was to sort of narrow down these rural areas where there are not many buildings to get the actual buildings into the map quicker. So you can see this kind of large green shape here on the screen. It's also on my shirt here. This is what an area of interest looks like, a very rural area, before it goes through MapSwipe. So the volunteers who use the tool essentially swipe through and indicate where they can see the buildings, and then you have the remainder left over, right? So the much smaller area where buildings actually exist on the ground. And then this data can be put into something like the HUT tasking manager, and then those buildings can get mapped more quickly without having to scroll through endless amounts of trees and areas where there are no buildings. Some important bits about MapSwipe. It is not currently an OpenStreetMap editor. It actually has its own separate database, open database that you can pull from, but it does not actually edit OpenStreetMap at this time. It also has a built-in validation system. So what that means is that each person, there's like at least 3 people that look at each tile on MapSwipe. So you can be a little less worried when you're using the tool about making some kind of false thing into the map or a database. And the MapSwipe is also both a mobile phone app and a web app. So you can also use it in your browser. Let me tell you about a few real-life examples where MapSwipe has been used. So in 2022, a cyclone kind of flew through Madagascar, where MSF was actually on the ground providing health services. And MSF wanted to get a better idea of where the buildings were especially damaged and where the flooding was especially high. And so they actually created a compare project on MapSwipe and had volunteers look at before and after imagery of the area. And then they were able to very quickly take that data, make their own maps out of it, and then give these maps to the field workers on the ground to be able to use that data in their assessment. In 2023, there was a project called Mapping for Heat Resilience that was between American Red Cross and Arizona State University. And this is where they had identified that people who live in mobile homes are much more susceptible to dying from heat-related issues, especially in the very, very hot summers. And so they wanted to quickly identify where people were living in mobile homes so they could create preventions like cooling stations and get a better understanding of the area to prevent these deaths. So this was also a find project on MapSwipe with a very intensive tutorial to showcase like what a mobile home looks like from satellite imagery. I'm going to tell you now a little bit about the current state of MapSwipe, so what actually one can do on MapSwipe up to date today. So we have 4 different project types now on MapSwipe. The first is the classic MapSwipe project type called the Find project type. And this is the one where you can look for a feature. So it can really be anything that you can see from a satellite. So it could be buildings or roads. We've had projects with airline strips, looking for mangroves, looking for solid waste. Basically, as long as it's big enough to see from a satellite, you can technically put it into a Find project on MapSwipe. We also have the validate project type. So this is when you can look at existing OpenStreetMap information from within MapSwipe and then indicate if it's well mapped or not. This can also be pulled directly from projects on the Hut Tasking Manager. So you can kind of have a look afterwards to see how well the mapping is done. And this is also really helpful for humanitarian organizations to see if an area might need to be remapped. I mentioned a little bit about the compare project before in the Madagascar example. This is when volunteers can look at before and after imagery and indicate some type of change. So this could be good for using like before and after disasters, or to see if a city has grown or diminished over time. This is actually the least common project that you will see on MapSwipe, simply because it's really difficult to find both before and after imagery for the scenario that you're looking for. And then our most recent project is called the Street Level Imagery Project. This is actually pretty much brand new, just a few months in development right now. It's kind of an experimental project. And this project uses mapillary imagery to allow volunteers to see basically street level imageries to look for some kinds of aspect of a feature. So for example, they could indicate if a road is paved, or in this example here, this is if there's solid waste in this image. You could technically use it to see something like, you know, is this building a school or a hospital? Or like, what is the surface quality of the road? So what's next for MapSwipe? Well, we do have a few project types in the works that are going to be debuting later this year, the first being the completeness project. So this is kind of the inverse of the find project, where you actually have satellite imagery with OSM kind of overlaid on top of it. So in this example, the blue is the existing OpenStreetMap information, and the volunteers can swipe through and indicate where OSM data is missing. And then these data gaps can then be taken and put into something like the Hut Tasking Manager to get the gaps into OpenStreetMap more effectively. We also have the Enhanced Image Validation project coming up this year. This is actually funded by the American Red Cross. I think it's also going to be pretty experimental. And in this case, the person who creates the project uploads a folder of images, so it can really be any images. It could be drone imagery, it could be street level imagery, and then they also upload a file of like AI machine generated information, and then the volunteers can indicate if those predictions are actually visible in the images. So I'm pretty excited about this project. I think it's gonna be pretty cool. It's actually inspired by Mapillary's verification projects, which came out a few years back. We also have the conflation project type. This is due to debut later this year, and this is going to have existing OpenStreetMap information overlaid on top of another data set. So I believe in this example, the blue is OpenStreetMap and the red is Humanitarian OpenStreetMap Team's FAIR model, but you could really use any model. You could also use like Microsoft Bing Buildings footprints if you wanted, and then the volunteer who doesn't know which is which more or less indicates which one matches the imagery better. A big question that we've been talking about over at MapSwipe is, should MapSwipe at some point actually become its own OSM editor? So right now, anything you do on MapSwipe goes into a different database, so it's kind of like a pre-step for getting into OpenStreetMap, but maybe it could be possible that this tool could become its own editor. Maybe, we're thinking about it. So some thoughts we've been having are, because MapSwipe has this built-in validation process already in it. So for example, let's say we have this street level image, right? Let's say 3 volunteers all say that this road is unpaved. Then would that information be good enough for MapSwipe to essentially then enter that into the road as an attribute? So it could kind of be maybe something like street complete, but remote, but using kind of a built-in validation process. Like maybe that could be interesting as an editor for OpenStreetMap. We've also thought, well, like, what if we expand on that and we add something like AI or machine learning into the mix, right? So because we have this validation process, maybe we could have 3 or more people validate a model that's overlaid in the satellite imagery, and then that could go back into the model and kind of get better, and then go back into MapSwipe and kind of do this loop over and over again until it's like, I guess, as perfect as can be. And then maybe a final person could click something that says, yes, I agree, this is correct, and then that goes directly into OpenStreetMap. while we've been kind of thinking about this, we've heard some things kind of in the greater OSM universe news. Like there was a situation that happened a few months ago where somebody at Mozilla had made a plugin that added AI directly to the map, and it kind of caused a little bit of, I guess I put scandal in quotes here. I don't know if it's really a scandal, but if you take a picture of that QR code, it actually leads to like quite a long discussion about this when it happened. These are some screenshots I took at the time of people that were very not the happiest about this. They felt like the OSM community hadn't really been considered. Yeah, people just weren't very happy, and eventually the person who created the plugin ended up disabling it. With talking to other folks who are in the MapSwipe community and just in my own OSM community, we've been kind of compiling like what is it that makes the possibility of making an editor that has machine learning in it so controversial. Some of the things we've come up with is that maybe we as mappers are worried about being kind of kicked out of the project, or are we going to be working with algorithms that are made by non-mappers? Is it just because AI is kind of bad, just in the eyes of many people, or it's bad for the environment, or maybe we're worried about intellectual property being stolen by companies, or we're going to train this algorithm that then gets sold and then we kind of lose control. But like, do we have control anyways over anything we do in OSM? I don't know. Also that like we bring a lot of beginners into the project, and if all the work that beginners typically do is kind of taken by a machine learning model, how do we bring people into OSM? How do we continue training them? Things like this, data quality problems, like we've thought about a lot of stuff. Don't really have any answers yet, but this is things we want to start to discuss with the OSM community if we do end up moving forward with this plan. Yeah, so basically, like, are there any legitimate uses of AI in mapping? I'm still not sure myself, and if there are, can MapSwipe actually use this in an ethical manner? And thinking about MapSwipe and its built-in validation, like maybe it's actually a great OSM editor for beginners, because more than one people look at it before it goes in, people can, through the validation project, kind of get to know what satellite imagery looks like, what proper mapping looks like. I don't know, it could be pretty cool, maybe. And then also, like, would people use this? If MapSwipe did become an OSM editor, would people actually be interested in using it, or would they just shun us? I'm not sure. So the next step is we really want to talk with the greater OSM community. If you take a picture of that QR code, that's actually just a little OSM diary entry that I made to kind of begin this discussion in a public place. If you'd rather speak to me directly, I am kind of representing MapSwipe as a governance member. We can also go that way, that's also fine. But just really wanted to present this idea to this audience and see what people think. And yeah, that's kind of what my entire talk is about. Again, my name is Nicole Siggins. I'm on the governance team of MapSwipe, and happy to chat with you, and thanks for listening.
All right, thank you, Nicole. I believe we have time for 1 or 2 questions.
Hi, Nicole. This is so cool. Just wanted to say that this is such a cool thing. I'm new to MapSwipe, so having some sort of like built-in validation is really awesome. I wanted to ask, you mentioned in the types of tasks you can make like a validation task.
Yeah.
Could somebody doing the validation also reference like the street imagery to validate, or are those like still separate channels right now?
Sorry, so the question is, can somebody using the Validate Imagery project use OpenStreetMap?
Use the street imagery when they're doing the validation task. Is that like
So
possible?
currently not yet, but it is a possibility in the future. Yeah, MapSwipe is kind of exploding at the moment. It went from like having a couple project types to really, like this year we're launching 3 alone. So that's definitely could be a possibility. Maybe write me so I can add it to our feature request list.
For sure, this is so cool. I'll stay tuned.
What's that?
This is so cool. I'll stay
thank
tuned.
you so much. I'm excited as well.
Okay, anyone else? Last call.
Hi, I just had a question about, you said several times during the presentation that validators, or you said specifically 3 a few times.
Yeah.
Did you find that if there were 1 or 2, the data quality wasn't as good, and then more than 3 was diminishing returns?
Exactly, yeah. There were a bunch of tests done a few years ago to kind of figure out what the default number of people who look should be, and they settled on 3. They felt like under 3 wasn't enough, and they didn't really see enough of a difference over 3 to really justify the amount of time that it took, especially like in a disaster. But each person who sets up a project on MapSwipe can change the number. So it can really be up to like 100 probably. I'm not even sure. I don't know what the upper limit is, but it's definitely a lot. Thanks for the question. There was someone over here. Did you have a question? No? Okay.
Okay, I think this brings us to a break. Thanks, Nicole.
Cool. Thank you, everybody. Have a good break.